Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Agency Freedom Podcast. We help insurance professionals move from captivity to freedom. This episode is all about the pivot. Yes, friends, episode on the stairway with the couch. Pivot! Yep, that's right. It's a pivot episode for those of you out there that are thinking about making a big change in your agency, but you're scared and trying to figure out how in the world do I pivot. This episode and this man that I'm talking to right now is going to help you understand one way to do it, and he's done it very successfully. He is Mr. Ben Criss of Strong Insurance Incorporated. Ben, where are you at in the country, man? I know you're in the Midwest somewhere. Remind me?
Yeah, we're based in a small town in western Nebraska, middle of nowhere. More cows than people.
Okay. Sweet. I thought it was Nebraska, but I didn't want to say that because I wasn't entirely sure, but I knew it was in the Midwest. So, Ben Criss, welcome, man. Thanks for making time for us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having us. We're excited to be here. First podcast, so couldn't have asked a better person to do it with.
No kidding.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I love that. Got to you first before everybody else. Now, I warn you, the secret's out. After you've been on this pod, everybody else will be like, holy crap, he's a great interview. And your phone is going to be blown up. So just get prepared.
We're ready for it.
Awesome. Hey, why don't you give us the bio, the backstory? I love getting other agents on here. Every time I ask my audience, what do you want to hear more of? It's consistently that they want to hear more stories from other agents. Lessons learned, challenges overcome, new ideas, just other agents in the trenches doing stuff just like you and I are. That's what people want. So before we get into any of that, I'd love for you to just share your background, how you got into insurance, how you got to this chapter in your career, whatever you want, man. It's yours. Go for it.
All right, so 30,000 foot view. It's kind of a long story. I'll make it as short as possible. It was the fall of 2015. I was living out in Lincoln, Nebraska, doing God knows what, random jobs, doing whatever. And we had a family-owned agency back here in a small town called Gordon, Nebraska. And my grandfather was running that agency, and he had a key employee who fell ill with pretty serious illness, and he was on the outs, man. He needed someone to come back and help him out, and I said, hell no, I'm not doing that. Insurance is the last thing I want to be doing. And through some coercing from my mother and him, they got me back in the, it would have been February of 2016, and that's when my career started. I was a spry 20-year-old, didn't really think I would be getting into the industry. I was more of a warm body in an office chair. And it wasn't long after my grandfather fell ill with, he fell with cancer, and so it was kind of a shit or get off the pot, get your license, figure out what you're going to do, or this thing is going to get sold to a bank or, venture money or something else. And so we did that, and I got licensed and was ready to rock and roll 2 days before he died. And so it was skin on our teeth that we were to keep the doors open at Strong Insurance. So real quick back history on Strong Insurance. We've been in business since 1932. It's family owned and operated the entire time. Great-great-grandfather started it, so on and so forth. So that's how I got into the industry. And then, after taking over the agency, it was just kind of learning the ropes and becoming an agency owner. So that's my getting into the agency. Do you want me to go all the way into the next steps of how we got to where we are today, or you got some more questions for me before we get to that?
Bro, absolutely. Okay. Keep on going. You're on a roll.
You bet. So after we purchased the agency, I got married, was fortunate enough to coerce my wife to quit her job at the pharmacy and come do a little bit of everything, kind of a CSR, account manager, bookkeeping type role. And that allowed me some time to start optimizing this thing, right? We brought it from 1970 agency with smoke on the walls to the 21st century, with technology and running better CRMs, AMSs, all the shiny gold objects, you know what I mean, that we all get sucked into. And so we did that from 2018. I took over ownership. We did that over the next 4 years or so. And it was fall of 2022. I jokingly said at a family Thanksgiving dinner, after growing the agency in the personal lines and ag heavy space for years, and hiring, and then kind of getting to the same point where it was so much service work and then hire another person, grow again, more service work, rinse and repeat, which you have to do if you're going to be in personal lines and ag, in my opinion. You have to be doing volume or stay very small, one of the two, in my opinion. But anyhow, made that joke that I said, to hell with it. I'm going to sell the agency, or the book of business rather, do an asset sale, and we're just going to go commercial. That's what I love doing anyways, so let's do that. And it was a joke in the fall of 2022 and a reality by January of 2023. And we were off to the races.
Well, you know what they say about every joke? Every joke has an element of truth.
That's very true. And it did. It's what I wanted to do, James. I enjoy the commercial space more than anything. It's not that I absolutely am disgusted in the personal lines or ag spaces. It's just not. It's not my challenge. It's just not where I like to play. And so we went through the whole process. We found a buyer, and June 1st of 2023 was the end of what we call Strong Insurance 1.0. It was the sale of the assets. We retained the name, the likeness, yada, yada. I was fortunate enough that all my employees wanted to come with me, and the buyer was okay with that. So we brought everyone with us. We moved 45 minutes down the road to a brand new building, not brand new, brand used building. We gutted, remodeled, and got in here. That took a few months, so we worked from home in the meantime, but we got in here mid-October, and it's been off to the races ever since. We found our calling in a couple verticals that we really wanted to pursue, and so far those two primary verticals right now are the real estate investors, such as yourself, and the trucking, transportation, logistics sector. So,
yep.
So that's kind of how we got where we are today in a nutshell.
Love it, man. And I love that it started out because of loyalty to family,
Yeah.
You got into this reluctantly because your grandfather needed help. Yeah. And you're a family guy, and you said, okay, fine, I'll do it. And here you are, almost 6 years later, and from what I can tell, you're living your best life. You are just making a game of it.
Oh yeah. I wouldn't have it any other way. I really found it. I found a passion for it. It was probably the fall of 2018 when I realized this is what I want to do. It's like you say, been about 6 years since I've really put myself into it, and the growth we've seen, both as an agent and an agency owner over the last 2 years has been phenomenal. And I attribute a lot of that to making connections with people. I think that's a huge factor that someone new, either coming captive or from the ground up scratch agency, they think everyone's competition, and they don't want to reach out and get the help and grab whatever knowledge you can. And that's been a huge factor for us in our success.
Well, and that tribalism is exactly what the carriers want, right? That is exactly how they win. That's how they keep captive agents and, younger, not as wise IAs in their hole, and make sure that the carrier gets the business, even if the agent doesn't get the business.
Yep.
I remember so many conversations back when I was a farmer's agent back in the day of, these carrier people telling these horror stories of how, shady independent agents are and how they only sell on price and they don't understand what's best for the client and they don't have any brand behind them. So, there's kind of like shysters almost. It's like, shady, like back alley drug dealers almost is the way that the territory executives used to describe it. And I mean, obviously we know that's not the truth. It's not even close to the truth.
Yeah.
But that tribal mindset is so deadly. I love that you have been able to, escape that thinking, maybe never even had that thinking, that us against them thing it's cute. It's immature and really ineffective.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's a game changer when because I was that way. Full transparency. When I got in the industry, I didn't want to talk to the agent down the street, whether they were captive, independent. This is my territory. Don't touch any of my stuff. And I very quickly realized that it's just you're going to get nowhere doing that. Being able to share the wealth of knowledge that you might have an experience that's different from the next guy is really a game changer. It really is, and yeah, I'm glad that we are free from those chains of that thinking.
Well, and it's how you and I got connected in a group of our peers.
You bet.
So, I want to get into. Let me just hit my little whoosh button here as we change the subject a little bit and talk more about this pivot, because I also made the move to doing commercial only, but I didn't do an asset divestiture nearly 98%. I sold my personal lines book, which, as we've talked about on the podcast a few times, at the time I sold it, it made up about 18% of my revenue and about 60% of my service work. It was a very easy choice, but we retained the bulk of our revenue and all of our great clients. When we sold our personal lines book, we didn't lose anybody in our top 50 clients. I mean, every single personal lines account was middle of the road at best.
Yep.
You did what I did, but at a completely different level, man. You were all the way in on basically hitting the hard reset button on the whole agency, the whole book of business. Help me understand, and I've got a few questions here. We're going to camp out on this pivot thing for a while. Help me understand what it was for you that made you start to get to the point that you're joking, in 2022?
Yep.
Joking, hey, I'm going to sell this thing and start over in commercial. Forget ag, forget personal lines. I'm going to sell it. Like, you'd obviously been thinking about it before that point, because you don't make a joke like that without putting a lot of thought into it and asking yourself, what if I did? If I did, how would I do it? If I did, what are the things that might happen? If I did, what are the unintended consequences that are likely to befall me and my team? I've been around you enough times to know that these are the kind of things that you say to yourself. If I were to consider that, how would that go? So walk me through that process, because a lot of our listeners out there, a lot of our freedom jumpers are sitting there processing, what if I divested of part of my book? What if I got out of an entire line of business or stopped doing something? What would that look like? Walk me through what your experience there in the early stages of, I don't like this. What if I stop doing it?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, there was a lot of forethought. I wouldn't say probably even enough pre-planning, but there was a lot. I'm a numbers cruncher, and I like to build spreadsheets, and I like to play with numbers and see what happens if you do this or that. And there was a lot of that. I mean, hours, countless hours of doing that and trying to make the decision. And I'll tell you a few factors of why that decision kind of came to a head. But trying to make that decision based on mostly numbers. Obviously, there's some emotional attachment there. It was very hard to do because it was a family agency. We had been in that same building for 90 years by the time I made this decision. In the same town, same building. I sat in the same seat as 3 generations before me. So that was a very difficult decision. But when you start looking at the numbers and the pivot we made, it really comes down to we are in a very small pool of talent. There's not a whole lot of talent, frankly, in Western Nebraska to pick from. A lot of the good stuff's already grabbed. And when we start looking at personal lines and ag in particular, especially ag, your loss ratios are rough and the servicing is intensive. And where we were located, I didn't have the ability to take us nationally to get large enough to rinse and repeat the process of hiring a new CSR or producer, or in our case, they're often a similar role or same role. You service your own book, yada, yada. So what was happening is we would hire a new person, grow the book large enough to obviously pay for them, make a little bit of money on top, and then they were tapped out. They could only service what they've already sold over the last 18 months, 12 months, 2 years, whatever it is, and write a little bit more on top. And then we'd have to repeat the process. Go find another person.
And then your producer is reverting to being a glorified account manager.
Exactly. They're no longer producing their CSR work, account manager work, and trying to produce on the side. And the hard part is it's not easy for us to just here. It's not easy to just go grab the next guy, bring in a CSR, hey, service this book. We're going to let this producer keep producing. It just doesn't happen that way very often. And so that coupled with, obviously the service work, we had around 3,100 clients in our book of business.
Wow.
And we did a lot of non-standard auto. I mean, that agency was conditioned for years to take anything that walked in the door. And turning that off after so many years is really difficult. We also took like 74% of all of our payments in that agency were done with cash or check, walk in through the door. Service requests or walk in through the door. And
I'm sorry, I threw up in my mouth just a little bit. So give me a second to regain my composure.
Yeah, it was
that one thing alone is an awful situation.
It was. It really was. And it's to ultimately no fault of the clients. It is our fault, but trying to recondition clients who we've had for 50 years in our agency, and that was how they've done it for 50 years. It gets really, really difficult to try to convince them.
And they get mad fast.
Oh yeah, and in a town of 1,600 people, you can only piss off about 5 before everyone knows about it.
Oh yeah.
So it was those multiple things, and then in the ag industry, we loved writing ag. That was our hot zone. We liked writing anything from small to large, huge operations. The issue is a lot of these guys have 15 trucks and a 2-car garage, and we're in western Nebraska. You're going to get nasty hailstorms.
You're going to get hailed on,
and so your loss ratios are slim to none. Or huge rather. And then your contingencies are slim to none because of that. Being profitable in the ag industry in the Midwest can be extraordinarily difficult. So all of these factors kind of were being mulled around in my head while I'm simultaneously looking at if we went with trucking, if we went into maybe contractors. We weren't sure at this time what the niche and verticals we wanted to be in was. We knew habitational was going to be in that for sure, but we knew we needed another one for our style and what we wanted to do. So through the spreadsheets I built that showed me how profitable we could be with the same number of employees going into these two verticals versus what we had done traditionally over my last 6 years in the agency, it was a no-brainer. I mean, it was, and we did divest, like you said, about, it was 98, if not a little more %. We only brought about $150,000 worth of premium with us. I mean, almost nothing. And it was kind of...
Not revenue, but premium.
Yeah. So we were all but a scratch agency 6 months ago.
At this point, you said you carried over your staff, which means you carried over more than 50% of your fixed costs. Because I'm guessing you probably treat your people well. You have some sort of benefits program, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so you're carrying over at least 50% of your fixed overhead, and you're restarting an agency with zero, annual recurring revenue. Or sorry, if we assume 12%, around $18,000 of annual recurring revenue, and you probably had fixed overhead somewhere north of $500,000, right?
It's pretty close. Right around. It varies, but right around at that time. It would have been about $400,000 annual fixed overhead. Yeah.
Payrolls in Nebraska are different than payrolls in
Oh,
Texas.
certainly.
Sorry. I
Certainly.
made a couple of general assumptions
Yeah,
there.
yeah, but still, 400 grand when you have nothing, not a lot coming in. Not to mention, we did a full remodel on this
Yeah.
building. We've got about 250, 300,000 into this new building. We've got a lot of money sunk into this thing, so it better work. But the numbers say it will, and that's, I guess, one thing that I would want to say to anyone who is potentially thinking about divesting from their existing book or a portion of their book. Don't do it with a lightheartedly. You need to make sure that the numbers work before you jump. Not to scare anyone from making that decision, but don't just think that you're going to change, pivot, and get rich. That doesn't happen. There's been a lot of late nights into the early mornings to make this thing happen.
Well, and I can attest to that as well. We only sold 20% of our book, but it's still 20%, and it still hurts. And it took us almost a year to get back to flat, to get back to where we were before we sold it. And that's not any net organic growth. It's just recovering the lost ground from the divestiture.
Yep.
So, man, it is not for the faint of heart. That's for sure.
Certainly.
So let's advance the story just a little bit. You have these thoughts of, I need to make a move. And you start thinking about, what are my niches going to be? If we do this, where would we focus in commercial? Obviously, being a generalist is not an option because you know better. So when you decided to make that joke at the family gathering, I would imagine you already had a good idea for exactly how you wanted to do it. So, catch us up to the next chapter of the story. You throw that hand grenade out in the middle of the family gathering and, set a chain of events in motion that ends up with a wholesale divestiture. How did that go?
Yeah, so I'm super fortunate that I have super supportive family. So I got to give them a huge shout out. Super supportive staff. For them, they all had the option to stay with the purchasing agency. So huge shout out to all of them, for especially my wife. Like, this isn't the only crazy idea I've had in our 5 years of being married, and she puts up with all my crazy ideas. So first off, huge shout out to all of those involved in this whole thing. But as far as, we actually did go about it wrong initially, James. I won't even lie about it. We initially we had a few verticals we wanted to be in to focus on, but we were trying to look at this as more of a generalist commercial type shop. And actually, through listening to your podcast, Carruthers' podcast, a couple other podcasts, is when I started to realize that I was doing that incorrectly. And I'm glad I caught it when I did. It was very, very early into the transition phase into the new office, rebranding, rebuilding websites, things like that, that we caught this and realized you do have to specialize in something at some point. Ultimately our goal is to potentially add 3 or 4 total niches and have 2 or 3 agents specialized in each vertical. But we don't want to get to the point where we'll write every commercial risk that walks in off the street. It's just not the way I want to operate anymore, and I've learned that. But ultimately, through that kind of learning process for myself, even we came to habitational and real estate, which has always been a passion of mine. I own a little bit of real estate myself, and so I've always enjoyed helping investors work the numbers and see what works for them. So for me, that's always been something I wanted to do. And then trucking was, honestly, to be frank, was not our intention. Something happened early on when we got a few good sizable trucking accounts who reached out to us, and we started really doing our research and learning this vertical. This would have been back in August of just last year, so about the first month after we sold. And Amber took a liking to it. She really started liking the trucking space. So over the next few months, we kind of ramped up that idea, started building that idea, and we went for it. We put her through some training courses, got her trip certified. did a boatload of late nights research and figured out this vertical and how we can be different in the space. And so that's what we're doing, is trying to be just different enough. There's a lot of guys in this trucking space, but so that's kind of how we ended up in the verticals that we are, and landing. The pivot was kind of done without an exact landing mark when we started that pivot, but I knew the pivot needed to happen, and so that's how we got where we are in the verticals we're in right now.
You and I have similar situations with being very reliant on quality people around us to do their job and to do it with excellence. I will openly admit, Riskwell has long ago expanded beyond my ability to make things happen on my own. We have 8 people on the team, and I can't do it without them. There's a couple of people that I've told I won't do it without them. Jokingly, it's like, if you leave, I'm probably going to put this thing up for sale because I don't want to do it without you. And the pivot is required. In order for the pivot to happen, I should say, buy-in from these people is required.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. How did you go about casting a vision for what you wanted to see Strong become, and get the people around you that are the ones that actually do the practice of insurance? They're the ones that actually answer the phone and run the quotes and talk to the underwriters and handle the claims. They're the ones that do this stuff. But you have to get them on board in order for you to get to be the executive of the company that you want to be, the company that you envision. Talk me through that process. How did you successfully become the advocate, the vision caster for this new version, the Strong 2.0, as you call it?
Yeah. So most of it goes back, James, to spreadsheets and numbers. When you can get them to realize that their income can be the same it is in this previous agency, in the new agency, in the 2.0 agency, with just a fraction of the clientele, that alone is an enticing factor for them. If you look at the numbers, it's something like, if you average $1,000 a policy, you're writing a bunch of non-standard junk, and you got 3,100 clients, you're looking at $3.1 million. But you can turn around and you can write 150 $30,000 accounts, and you're at 3.5 million. So if you start doing the math, it doesn't take long to see that difference. So, and once again, I'm a spreadsheet guy. I like to lay everything out in spreadsheets the best I can, and I'm very open with my staff. I mean, when I started this process of potentially selling, even before it was happening, we had a 5-year plan built out. We had 5-year profit loss expectations put together, and they all got to see that. I don't want them to be in the dark and always wondering, well, could this company fail in 2 years? Do we have the money to last 2 years? I wanted them to see that if we do this, this is where we'll be. And so I'm open with that. They all got to see that. And so I think that played a big factor in it. I mean, maybe other operations aren't quite as open, and that's fine. But I think that helped tremendously in getting the buy-in from these guys to see the full vision on paper. If we do this, here's the reward.
No, that makes sense. And it's really hard for someone to argue with numbers. Really hard to argue with closing percentages and average account value and average time spent servicing one client.
Yep.
And looking at, how much is your time worth, Mr. and Mrs. CSR? Okay, well, this account on an annual basis has revenue of $600. And I see that you have had 14 service calls with them in the preceding year. You've spent a total of 6 hours with this client, and we have $600 in total revenue.
Mm-hmm.
This does not work.
Yeah.
The service load of this client makes them unprofitable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know we've talked about money on this podcast a few times, the 3 kinds of insurance money: premium, and then revenue, and then profit. But it's not until you get into that third bucket of really digging into what is your actual profit here? What do you have left over after all of your expenses, including labor, are taken into account? And I'm a numbers guy too, as you can imagine, and it just brings so much clarity. You know, one of the things that I say in my book, Leaving Captivity, at the beginning of chapter 5, which is the money chapter, is you got to know your numbers. If you don't understand these concepts like net operating income and EBITDA, and do you understand how to calculate your labor costs? Do you understand how to calculate your average account value as a function of revenue? Like, if you don't know how to do these things, go to Investopedia, go to Forbes, or wherever you need to get your very basic financial information, folks, and get up to speed. Because what Ben is talking about here, you're not able to do unless you understand some basic concepts. And I can't teach you. There's no podcast on the planet that can teach you or replace you putting in the work to get yourself familiar and comfortable with basic financial concepts. Because you're not running an insurance agency, you're running a business that operates in the insurance field. And sorry, I mean, soapbox here, Ben. I know you're just along for the ride.
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, financial literacy in any business owner operator capacity, whether you're, I guess, owner operator or just owner, you have to have some financial literacy in order to see the projection, see the writing on the wall, see if this is going to work. And in this case, since we're talking about pivot, if you don't know the numbers, both where you're at now and what you think you're going to be at after the pivot, don't make the pivot until you do, because you might brush something aside that you have now for something much worse. You really got to make sure the numbers make sense, you know. And I agree with you completely on that.
100%, man. Where else do you want to go here? We're well underway with the pivot conversation. I think it's probably logical to talk sales and marketing next. We've done the ops, we've done the training. When you do the deciding of, hey, we're going to pivot, here's who we want to be, how do you go about reforming your provider roster, you know, the direct appointments, the wholesale appointments that you need, putting your messaging together? How are you going to go to market? Like, talk me through that process of pivot. Did you hire a coach? Did you have a retreat, like EOS, Entrepreneur's Operating System? Like, what did that process look like for you guys? Because when you make that kind of pivot, your sales and marketing have to pivot, because the way that you did sales and marketing before doesn't work anymore. You're literally hitting the reset button on the whole thing.
Yeah, this was probably one of the hardest parts of the whole pivot, to be honest. It is very difficult because you got to rebrand everything to match your new target audience. And on the sales side, with the marketing side, you have to, as you said, recapture what markets you need access to for the new verticals that you're approaching. And coming from ag and personal lines, there's not very many similar carriers going to trucking and habitational. And we're still actively, almost daily, working on new partners that we've been chasing. Some of these partners I've been chasing for years, but carrier partners, I say. And so that was probably one of the hardest parts, was finding the correct markets to be in and to be able to approach, and then rebuilding the branding. Honestly, when it comes to the branding and the websites and things like that, obviously we all know there's some great dudes out there doing this, guys, gals, great companies out there that you can approach to do this. Frankly, we did 95% of it ourselves, in-house. Probably not the best use of my time and not the best use of some of my late nights, but it was a process. I mean, it was, you know, we did utilize quite a bit of AI as far as generating thoughts and ideas to approach when it came to targeting the new clientele that we were after. And then the internet's a powerful tool. I mean, if you want to become a brain surgeon, you could probably do it on the internet. And so that's what we did. We got on the internet, we figured out marketing strategies, which James alluded before this video. He's seeing some of my advertisements. So obviously I'm not that dialed in yet, but we figured out marketing strategies. We figured out verbiage that works well and doesn't work well. And this is something that we're beginning to start to offload now to some third-party companies that we partner with, because we're getting to the point where I don't have the time to be, playing with Facebook advertising and looking at click-through rates and yada yada yada.
Oh yeah. No, you're long beyond that.
Yeah. So we're getting people in to do that for us, but the one thing that we did is we built a business plan to forecast our model, more of a credo for ourselves. We good?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's fine.
I didn't know I was going to do that.
That's just fine.
No. Note to self, I warn the warn the guest. Oh man, that's funny. I just took a squad shot.
Oh.
Totally interrupting my. I didn't realize that button was going to do that.
No, that's no problem.
Sorry.
I thought
I was just taking a screenshot
like,
of our conversation.
No, that's just fine.
Didn't realize. For those of you that are not on my computer screen right now, I just did this thing where it takes a picture of Ben and I, which I was going to post later talking about this conversation. Had no idea I was going to put a countdown timer on the screen and totally take Ben out of his thoughts. So I apologize. Please continue.
No, that's no problem. But yeah, I mean, overall, the important thing that I would say when it came to that pivot and the marketing and sales side, we lost some valuable partners just due to being the hard market, that we are in right now. We weren't able to get some of the appointments that we previously had because, well, we were technically a scratch agency. Some of those we missed by the moratoriums came out just by a hair before we were supposed to get appointed or get our new codes. So there was some nuances to play with there, but I think one thing that I will say for those that are interested in making this pivot, I would do a little more due diligence than I did when it comes to market access for your new verticals. I wish I would have been a little more prepared for or had a few more of those carriers on board before we made the pivot. We're to the point now where we have the market access we need. It took us 3 months probably of fighting tooth and nail to get those, and I think that could have been done a little earlier. That would have helped. But and then the marketing side, once again, same thing there. Make sure you start to build out even simple stuff like static advertisements in Canva that are based around the verticals you want to go into. So you have some ideas and brain slush floating around Canva ready to rock and roll when it's time to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
So
no, man, that is exactly the answer that I thought you were probably going to get into. One, Canva is a secret weapon for sure, but having the foresight to realize we're going to have to start over from zero. And, oh, by the way, the most powerful tool in the history of mankind is literally sitting on your phone and your computer screen. It's called the internet. Now, interesting point that you make, the comment about becoming a brain surgeon from the internet. I completely agree. And I think that Skillshare, the website Skillshare, is probably proof that you can learn almost anything you want to learn from the internet. So, man, that is such a powerful story, and I love that you have been able to make the pivot that you have. As we land the plane, any final thoughts? Anything else you want to share that we need to hear? Anything we didn't get into that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I think the big thing is anyone making this pivot or looking to make this pivot, it's planned and calculated. It's not an accident. What James did with his book of business and his divestiture wasn't an accident. What we're doing here is not an accident. There's probably a little less planning and calculating now that I look back at it than should have been done. But don't fly into it dark. but don't be afraid to do it either. If you feel like your calling's in a different vertical, different niche, different angle, whatever you want to call it, don't be afraid to try to make that jump. At the end of the day, you want to make sure you're doing something you enjoy doing. And that was, for me, the number one reason I did this was I enjoy commercial insurance more than I enjoy personal and ag. And I wanted to do this. And I, once again, can't thank my family and my staff for putting up with my crazy antics and last minute, let's do this,
Yep. Man, it is exactly that point that got me down the road. If it's not fun, don't do it for your business.
Yep.
Like if you don't enjoy it, don't have it be a big part of your business, because you're doing it every day. If you allow it to be in your business, you're going to be spending so many hours over the course of your lifetime doing something that you don't enjoy. And life is way too short, and there are way too many ways to make good money to be doing something that makes you miserable.
Yep.
People of skill and drive and intelligence. Now, obviously, some people are stuck with the work that they have, in other fields and other industries. Somebody is cleaning the fryer at McDonald's.
Yep.
Sorry. You are where you are for a variety of circumstances, some of them outside of your control, many of them inside of your control. But for those of us that have skills and intelligence and drive, don't do something that you hate. If you hate what you're doing, do something about it. That's my message for you as we wrap up this episode, all about pivoting. Because I promise you, of the thousands of people a month that listen to this podcast, there's got to be at least a couple hundred that need to make a pivot, that need to do something transformatively different in your agency in 2024. Hopefully this conversation has been useful for you. Ben, if people want to get in touch with you, what's your favorite social platform? What's the best way for someone to reach out to you, man?
They can get a hold of me, LinkedIn, Facebook, they can call my agency. I'll make time for anybody. If they have any questions about how we did what we did or why we did what we did or want me to further elaborate, feel free to reach out to me.
Awesome. Hey, he is Ben Criss, founder and CEO, president, chairman. What's your title?
President.
There you go. President of Strong Insurance Incorporated in the great state of Nebraska. This has been another episode of the Agency Freedom Podcast. Drop us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. I'm staggered at how few reviews we have based on how many listeners we have. So do me a solid and leave a review. Thank you in advance. Make it a great day. We'll talk to you soon, boys and girls. Y'all take care.